So before getting right into the trip, I want to add a bit of context on my situation at the time. It was the summer of 2021. I was 17 years old, and eating tabs of acid as if they were candy. Tripping was a part of my regular weekly routine this summer, and was for months prior to this summer too. I had no job, only half-assed schoolwork that was very easy due to COVID, and monthly allowance money that would go straight to LSD as soon as I would get it. Anytime I had 20 bucks and 12 hours to spare, I'd be tripping balls. Tolerance meant nothing to me. I saw no reason to wait between trips, because the internet had led me to believing that the substance was totally harmless as long as you knew how to handle it. My highest dose before this trip was 6 tabs by myself in the dark, and I took it like a champ. This led me to believe I was invincible, and could have an ego death outside and nothing would go wrong. Guess what happened? Things went wrong. I woke up at around 11 AM. I was very sleep deprived due to my weekly LSD induced all-nighters, so this was the norm for me. I eat breakfast, brush my teeth, and immediately leave my house without saying anything to my family except for, "Bye, see you later, I'm gonna hang out with friends." I then catch the bus to the side of the city where I spent most of my days hanging out in high school, opposite to the area I lived in. Before beginning the trip, I wanted to stop at a grocery store to chat with a girl I was seeing at the time. She was working there, so I stopped by and talked to her on a break. As she went back to work, I said my goodbye and walked around the corner. I then proceeded to step into an alleyway. I whipped 5 tabs of acid out of my pocket and thoughtlessly slammed them onto my tongue. I was ready for a good time. After doing that and taking a picture of my tongue out to send to my friends, I began walking down a side street to a local park that I frequented and would spend nights partying at. As I was walking there, I could feel the tabs breaking apart in my mouth as I salivated like a wild animal in excitement. I could taste that very slight, not really bitter, but just that tangy electric feeling you get when you have a bunch of acid on your tongue and know what seemed to come. Eventually, I arrive at the local park and begin navigating my way through the back trails nobody went on in the daytime. These areas of the park were very obscure and out of the way, but I knew them like the back of my hand from all the nights spent partying here with other teenagers. On the way, I unexpectedly passed by an older person doing nature photography, so I smile and say hello. Then I settle down at the spot I plan to chill at. I take off my bag and pull out a few essential items I had with me in preparation for the trip. My phone, my speaker, a couple grams of bud, and a bowl with a lighter. I set up a camp on this little rock and I put on some music. I start with the classic Pink Floyd record, Dark Side of the Moon. I've heard the album before, but never the whole thing in its entirety while tripping. So I eagerly press play on the album and listen as I wait for effects. At this point I can slowly feel the trip starting to creep upon me. I'm super happy and excited at this point, ready for some wicked mind-bending out-of-body experiences to occur for the remainder of the day. Not even a tad bit concerned about the fact that I am alone, miles away from home, and outside while they will be happening. As I'm approaching the end of the album, I can feel my ego starting to dissolve into nothingness. Now, for most people this can be a life-changing, insanely difficult experience that is a challenge to overcome. However, given that this was about my 40th trip in a year, and probably my 4th or 5th one in the last month, my ego was basically in a constant state of suppression, and over this summer, I essentially gave myself HPPD. So for me, in this moment, the ego death was smooth like butter. I effortlessly let go of my sense of self, as I usually did, and just went with the flow. I vividly remember the song titled Brain Damage had a very profound message to me at the time. The lyrics, "The lunatic is on the grass," hit me dead in the face as I was sprawled out on the grass with my belongings scattered around me at that moment. For those who have never experienced ego death, what it is like for me is all of my problems, insecurities and things I dislike about myself just start getting shoved in my face in a totally ruthless, unavoidable way. Ever since my first time having it, I thought it was gnarly as fuck. So those lyrics really hit home, because it was something I was deep down insecure about at the moment. Shortly after that song, the album ends, and I move on to my next album of choice, Sgt. Pepper's Lonely Hearts Club Band by the Beatles. This is where shit really starts to hit the fan. So as the very first song on the album is playing, I decide it's now time to smoke some weed. I pack up a bowl and face it, feeling groovy. I then pack up a second one, and halfway through smoking I begin absolutely blasting off into hyperspace. I then put the bowl down and let the visuals take over. everything began to explode into an infinite void of fractals and kaleidoscopes, unlike anything you could ever imagine unless you've experienced it. For example, I would turn my head to look at a tree, and boom, the tree and its surroundings would violently rip apart into a void of kaleidoscopes. I'd noticed that and glance at the ground. The same thing would happen with the dirt underneath me. Within this infinite void of fractals lived entities. How I view these entities personally is a visual manifestation of my subconscious mind. It takes the wheel over your conscious mind whenever a person is in a high-dose psychedelic state. So, for example, I would be laying down listening to the music, and all the words in every single song would be spoken back to me by these giant beings in the sky that were telepathically communicating with me, and they were spoken back to me in a way where it would relate to my problems. The overall message these entities were telling me through the song lyrics was basically, "You fucked up, you stupid kid. You really have gotten yourself into quite a predicament. You're miles away from home with no help, and you're about to be having a little chat with us for the next 8 to 12 hours. All the while this is happening, I'm convinced that I'm hearing people talk around me. People in the park knowing I'm on acid. And at one point I remember even hallucinating construction vehicles and police cars through the trees in a nearby residential driveway. I looked at my phone. It was only 1:30 PM. So now it has dawned on me that I am simply not going to be able to find my way home. I caught the bus out here after all. How am I going to properly navigate Google Maps and catch a bus downtown, and then another bus back to my house tonight at 8 PM, when every time I look at something, it explodes into an incomprehensible sea of geometry and alien beings? At that moment I rationalised it is simply not possible. I was half blacked out and unable to see 2 feet in front of me because the visuals were just overwhelming. There was no chance in hell I would find my way back home safely today. This is when panic began to set in. Luckily one of my friends happened to be biking over to the park I was tripping at, and I knew this. So I pick up my phone, unlock it, open Snapchat, and frantically begin typing borderline unreadable messages due to them being so poorly spelt. Overall though, I got the point across that I was having a bad trip, and I understood the location he told me to meet him at. However, I'm still not convinced that I am safe. So what does my stupid, mid-ego deaf self decide to do? I called my mum. I remember the words I said to her so clearly. "Mum, I took too much acid, I need your help." I sounded like a scared little child on the phone with her. Obviously, she was not a very happy camper upon hearing this. She had plans to go to my older brother's house in the next city over from us, and was in the car heading there as I called her. Even though she was pissed off at me, she still did come all the way down to the side of the city I was at to pick me up, thankfully. So after I hang up the phone with my mum, and I'm assured she is coming, and I'll be okay, I begin walking out of my secret spot to go find my friend who is coming to meet me in the park. I'm stumbling my way down the trail, and mid-ego deaf, it feels like it is a total walk of shame. I feel like I'm a living stereotype of a dumb kid who took too much acid and needs to be rescued by his parents. I felt like I had a massive dunce cap on my head, and I basically did with the way I was robotically stumbling through the grass, hardly even walking on the sidewalk correctly, with cars and joggers and kids playing on a playground all around me. Eventually though, I meet up with my friend, and although I feel a bit relieved, I'm still acting like a complete nervous wreck next to him. I felt so bad for inconveniencing him, and making him come out of his way to help me. I felt like a bad friend. I was just so much more ashamed and insecure than I normally would be, because that's the way it can be when you're in this kind of high-dose state. As we're walking down the street, he spots my mum's car and walks me over to her. She gets out of the car and is screaming and yelling at me, and all I can say is, I'm sorry mum," over and over again. I don't remember too clearly, but I believe my friend attempted to calm her down a bit, and he offered me some water. My mum then yelled at me to get in the car, and I complied. Meanwhile, my hand is shaking uncontrollably as I try to sip this water, and end up crushing the bottle and spilling it all over myself. I wave bye to my friend and thank him for being there for me as we drive off. Now I am in the car, sitting next to my 2 younger brothers and my niece. The oldest one of them is only 12 years old, so they have no idea what's happening. My stepdad is in the front seat. As my mum is driving away, I'm just endlessly apologising to her, and my stepdad calmly tells me to just chill out, and to not say anything about what is going on in order to not let the little kids know. He tells me to just close my eyes and rest my head. So I do as he says, but whenever I close my eyes, I began having some absolutely crazy, indescribable out-of-body experiences. I'm not talking like some cool patterns and stuff, nah. This is on a whole different level. I'm talking about visiting other dimensions, going to heaven and hell, seeing the framework of how life works, getting stuck in infinite time loops, that kind of stuff. The most interesting part about the things I was experiencing was that they would cause me to start uncontrollably and unknowingly begin moving around in the car. My younger brothers told me after the fact that I was sticking up my middle finger and squirming my hands around a lot, muttering nonsense and a whole bunch of other stuff. All of this I only vaguely remember, as my memory was completely shot in the moment. It was like a psychedelic blackout. At one point, I open my eyes and say out loud, "Nothing matters," to my family, and proceed to bang my head against the window in an attempt to die and go to heaven. I'd flex all of my muscles and convulse because I thought I was dying. I was moving around the car so much it affected my mum's driving and could have potentially ended in a car accident. I was totally out of control of my own body. Eventually, by the time we luckily and safely got to my older brother's house, everyone had gotten out of the car besides me. What I happened to be doing was flailing around the back seat of the car, screaming, shoving my face into the seats, unknowingly, because at that moment, I was experiencing some sort of infinite hell. I remember being stuck in an infinite time loop, where I was cursed to live the worst possible version of my life for the rest of eternity. So I was sitting in my own pile of metaphorical shit, and all the bad deeds I've ever done, and was forced to keep reliving it forever and ever. I hardly even knew I was on drugs at this point. I was just in this hell forever. This caused me to act a fool in the back seat, all screaming and convulsing and stuff. I then completely blacked out. Next thing I know, I wake up in my stepdad's arms. I hear him say, "What's your name? What's your mum's name? What's my name? What's your dad's name? Are you okay?" I replied to all the questions correctly and hopped up out of his arms. I grabbed my phone and got out of the car. My older brother is in his truck next to my mum's car and he pulls up, so I jump in his car and just say to him, "Bro, I'm tripping balls." He just kind of chuckles, and we talk for a bit as I regain composure. He drives around the block a few times, then pulls into his garage. Now, even though I'm still tripping, I totally regain my composure. I'm just sitting in my brother's house with all our family and his fiancée, eating pizza like it's a normal family event while I'm on 5 tabs of acid. My little brother starts asking me questions about what acid is and how it makes you see things that aren't there, so I just avoid him. Then my older brother pulls me aside and brings me into his garage, where he talks to me and lays some life advice on me, telling me to never do acid again. He goes over what I did in the car, and I knew I freaked out and I could vaguely piece together certain parts of it, but I didn't know how bad it really was from my parents' and siblings' point of view. From there on, my mum leaves me to spend the night at my brother's house because she's too pissed off at me to deal with my shit. So for the rest of the night, I'm just tripping balls with my older brother, and it feels like I'm only on 1 or 2 tabs. Eventually we smoke some weed, which brings the intensity back up to a point where I can't really converse with him. After that, I go lay down and put the blankets over my head with my earbuds in, and let the visuals slowly take over. Eventually, I got up again and ate more food as the weed wore off. That's just how the rest of the night went. We just chilled out, smoked weed, and I told him about what I went through mentally that day as I slowly came down. I was up all night long, till 6 AM the next day. After that, it was finally over. As for the repercussions of this trip, I got grounded, of course. I got a very angry call from my dad after my brother told him what happened, in an attempt to scare me away from psychedelics my dad found out. I got a lot of long talks from my parents. Thankfully I had no psychological damage or PTSD from this trip. After it was over I just thought to myself, okay, well I guess that just happened, and I moved on with life. However, one negative repercussion I faced mentally was due to my excessive heavy usage of the drug over a long period of time. I developed a weird form of HPPD, or hallucinogen persisting perception disorder, which lasted for the next few months. It wasn't diagnosed, and it wasn't even the kind of HPPD where I was consistently seeing hallucinations in my daily life. What it was a constant feeling of paranoia and being on edge. I always felt like my parents knew when I was up to something bad, and I felt like I was being watched, or there were cameras in my house. It was very weird and strange, and it's something that slowly creeped up on me after months of weekly, sometimes multiple times a week level usage. After this trip though, I took a long hiatus from psychedelics. Within the next few months, the paranoia went away, and since then I have now graduated high school with very high grades and take life much more seriously. No longer will I make such careless and reckless decisions like the one I did that day. Lessons to be learned. Don't trip every weekend for months on end, and don't have an ego death outside. Communication from the other side. A DMT trip report. Date: Friday, May 20th, 2022. Time: 11 PM till 11:15 PM. Set and setting: lying in bed, no rush, totally relaxed, ready to go to sleep. Background: I'm 50 years old and a late bloomer when it comes to tripping. I'm fairly new to psychedelics. I've used mushies about 8 times with the doses ranging from 1 to 5 grams. I've used also DMT about 20 times over the last few months or so. I use a vape pen. While every DMT trip of mine was bizarre, as DMT trips tend to be, I had one that was just a different kind of bizarre than anything else, hence my desire to share the report. My normal trips typically start with visuals of Aztec-like figures and then fast-moving activities such as carnival-type stuff and gambling halls. Then it goes deeper to different kind of space realms and different worlds or dimensions. I normally see entities, but I can't recall if I interact with them or not. I think so, but I can't remember what they said if they said something. Although, I feel more wise the next day, lol. The come up. Well, during this last trip, I met an entity that seemed to be determined to communicate with me in a more practical way. When I started to hallucinate, after about the 3rd draw from the pen, I felt the presence of an entity by my side, although I did not see him. Normally, there is a sense of losing your own ego, but this time I felt the presence of another entity, in the same way as if another person is in the room. This time, the trip also felt slower, more cognitively processable. The trip. The weirdness started when he placed a kind of marker in the first world or dimension that I have entered. It was like a spot of light made up by red, green and blue energy, with a kind of 3D cubed force field around it. Then as I passed through the different worlds or dimensions, I could always see the same marker in each one of them. It always looked the same, no matter how different the worlds were in their structure. I'd travelled from worlds with a purely physical nature to ones that were more energetic and spiritual in nature, from deep, dark, demonic type worlds to bright and happy ones. All had the same marker or reference point. This trip was a lot more about thoughts than visuals. I'm not sure if thoughts were planted in my brain as a kind of communication or learning of some sort. During the trip, it felt like there were 3 reasons why the entity placed the marker. 1. He was trapped in a dimension that he could not get out of, a kind of cry for help. It's kind of like how you would use a light flare if you were lost at sea. It felt like I needed to go help him. 2. As with DMT trips, you remember but don't remember at the same time. It felt as if the entity was myself, but from a different dimension, marking it to show me that I am existing in another dimension as well. Kinda like you would make a knot in your handkerchief to remember something. I'm sure I would not have remembered this trip if it was not for that marker. 3. It was kind of as if he wanted to communicate with me that these dimensions are real and not just imagined. All activities are happening at the same time and in the same space. In other words, universes are just different kinds of perceptions, otherwise known as a parallel universe. They're all real, but don't exist within themselves but purely constructed by consciousness. It's hard to explain right. The type of consciousness determines how that particular dimension is constructed. Kinda lines up with new discoveries in quantum physics, if I understand it properly. The come down. Normally my come down from a DMT trip just consists of a fading of visuals into just outlines of the colours. Kinda looks like spider's webs, outlines of images. I'm normally super relaxed and my heart rate seems to fall dramatically during this phase. Well, this time, 2 questions popped into my mind. 1. Could it be that the second entity is a defense mechanism from my mind, as to not completely give up the ego? Kinda like an imaginary friend. That would be kinda sad. 2. If the entity was myself, what steps could possibly be made to integrate this knowledge? This changes everything. After about 20 minutes, I got up and went to make myself a cup of coffee. I felt that I had a lot to think about. I would like to hear from anybody that may have experienced such a kind of trip, or do you have any advice on what to make of it? I'm curious to hear your thoughts. Thanks, Hein. The casino at the centre of the universe. A 4.5 gram psilocybe cubensis trip report. This incident occurred around late 2016 or so. I had long been interested in psilocybin mushrooms and psychedelics generally, and after having had a few heroic doses under my belt over the years, I felt it was time to cultivate some for myself. I mean, how hard could it be? Surely my first attempt will be poor. I was no stranger to strong psychedelics, having brewed numerous powerful ayahuasca brews using as many different leaves, barks and seeds as I could possibly source, and even growing Salvia divinorum plants in my California dining room windows years prior. I had used LSD and LSA, even Datura, but not nearly to the extents that I've read. I was even slipped PCP once, not to my knowing, and that was not a particularly pleasant experience. Finally ready to grow mushrooms, I quickly rushed to order some spores, and after a few days, held up in customs, the specimens were released, and I promptly got to work as soon as they arrived. Contents: 1 envelope signed and sanctioned by customs with "for microscopy use only" and gift. A 10cc syringe of psilocybe cubensis golden teacher spores suspended in distilled water. Fast forward some weeks, and much nail biting later, a healthy first flush of shrooms are ready to be picked and prepared accordingly from their fruiting chambers. One mushroom even clocked in at over 60 grams itself. The pileus, cap, was as big as an adult hand. I could tell I got very lucky with the genetics in these, as the blooming reaction was beyond extreme. The stems literally turned charcoal black with a deep tinge of blue-purple when the stipe, or stem, were cut from the cakes. I immediately knew I had some real bangers here. I was beyond eager to test the strength of these puppies, and my girlfriend and I had planned to go to a casino a few hours away the coming weekend. What better place to test these fuckers out other than a colourful casino? I carefully measured out around 4.5 grams of dried material, equal parts caps to stems, and put them in my shirt pocket, and we headed to the casino. After arriving and parking on the roof lot, I downed a beer or two that we had brought to help wash the mushrooms down. It wasn't particularly pleasant or tasty. I also smoked some cannabis to hopefully potentiate the effects. After consuming the dried specimens, we entered the casino. My girlfriend was not taking any, as she was going to be on hand to protect me and pull me out of there if things got dicey. It didn't take long before I could start to feel the mostly familiar effects. It seemed as if the air was sucked out of the surrounding spaces. The intricate Indian patterns in the casino popped with sharpness and colour, and things started to distort visually. The carpet designs and wall sconces made me especially dizzy. The lights were too bright, yet impossible to not stare at. Everything took on a slight watery shimmer, and had a mild vibration or distortion of some sort. I could feel the top of my head start to feel lighter, as if it was dissolving and opening up to the universe. My brain and headspace started to feel impossibly large. I was familiar with these effects, but I was not used to them coming on this fast. 40 minutes to an hour and 20 was basically standard, but I was only about T+20 into the trip. I pulled my girlfriend aside and told her, "Fuck, I'm tripping hard already. These things are crazy." We wandered around as the mushrooms took a stronger hold on my reality and psyche. The slot machines were downright mesmerising, but the casino was so packed that night that none of the machines I wanted were available. I wasn't particularly interested in any of the old reel and wheel one-armed bandits. There were even a long line for a lot of the more entertaining machines. We just continued to go machine to machine, and I would stand behind the player literally watching the slot machines respond to my very thoughts. It was at this point that the strangest and most bizarre aspect of the trip was in full force. The entire universe had seemingly inverted itself around my consciousness. My physical perceptions and vantage point of experiencing standard reality were unchanged, but the feeling of an inverted reality was ineffable and totally inescapable. It was literally mind-blowing, as if a deeper level of my existence phased out into a parallel opposite. I had become everything that wasn't me, yet I was me, while retaining an ordinary perspective on reality, but my control of things seemed externalised. It is impossible to describe. My thoughts were being manifested in real time just short moments later. The glove of my conscious experience of the universe was turned inside out for a few hours. I had entered an inverted, yet totally perceptively identical version of our manifest reality. It was as if I had become the Wizard of Oz or something. We continued to go from machine to machine, and everyone was winning. If I thought in my mind that 3 golden tickets were going to come up on a Willy Wonka machine, it did. Even the wild minigames that get people up from their seats. Old ladies were so ecstatic that I'm surprised none of them had heart attacks. I watched many hundreds, if not quite a few $1,000s pour out of these machines as I watched, and literally willed it to happen, hopelessly knowing that I would never get a moment on any of them. We wandered around the huge casino some more, checking in on the live free music in the Wolf's Den, and we hit the roulette tables. I went up to the plexiglass guard that surrounds the wheel on a game that was ready to start. Everyone had placed their bets and the wheel starts spinning. I casually say, 28, and after some time, it hits 28. People look strangely as the table is raked clear of hundreds of dollars in chips. We leave the table, heading to hopefully find an open video poker so we can pull our $1 free beer trick on the machines. We cross paths with a woman that was at a roulette table down the way, and I have the urge to ask her if any particular number was hitting for her tonight. She replies, 28 has been really good. And we head to the video poker. No open games. It had probably been 2 hours after ingestion at this point, so the psilocybin and psilocin was coursing through my blood at full clip. It even felt like my blood was electricity or some type of foreign energy. At this point, we decided to go sit down and order some pizza. Not my idea. My mind was blown when my girlfriend ordered what I thought was a root beer, but the liquid was clear. I thought that this was part of the trip, but I had apparently never seen birch beer soda before. It felt like I was from an alien universe. At one point I also thought I was hearing birds chirping while we were waiting for our pizza, but the waitress laughed and pointed out wall-mounted speakers that were in fact playing actual bird noises. No auditory hallucinations there, thank God. I opted for a Caesar salad and tried to stomach a slice of pizza. It felt weird eating pizza in this state, even though I knew it was delicious. I couldn't shake the incredibly alien feeling of having the universe completely inverted around my centre of consciousness. I tried to explain it to my girlfriend, but she just said I was tripping. I thought to myself, if I could reliably invoke this type of state and have a wingman for betting, I could completely empty this place out. After eating, I noticed there was a table with my game of choice nearby. Craps. It was a $5 table, and there was room for me at my favourite spot on the table. I waited about a half hour for my turn to shoot the dice to come around. My girlfriend was off to the side of the table to keep an eye on me. I was terrified to accidentally look anyone in the eye, as my pupils were probably jet black with no trace of blue at that point. The anxiety level was rising, but I held my composure and placed some frugal bets. I probably only had about $65 in chips to experiment with. I ordered 3 drinks, and so did my girlfriend. I started my hand with relatively conservative bets, and the game took off quickly. In my tripped out state, I was amazed that I was able to keep up with the pace of the action. As I started to get deeper into my hand, the bets on the opposite side of the table were piling up into towers of chips, and many of the stacks were changing colours. There were even stacks of high-dollar bumblebee chips forming. Got to the point where I could hardly throw the dice without knocking a few stacks over every time. The people betting were cheering with more fervour every throw of the dice, and even the workers at the table seemed impressed. At this point I was at least 50 shots in without throwing a 7, and one guy started placing propositional bets that pay 30 to 1, but are only good for the next throw. This cat bet on 12, double boxcars, and by God it hit. He takes most of his winnings and places a higher bet on the same thing, and it hit again. The table literally erupts, and scores of people start crowding this lowly $5 craps table to see what the ruckus is all about. He takes his winnings again and places an even higher bet on the 30 to 1 double boxcars, and it hits for the 3rd time in a row. People were literally freaking out. The towers of chips on the far end of the table are even higher and more numerous. Easily many tens of thousands of dollars on the $5 table. This piqued the curiosity of the pit boss and his lackeys as they come down from the camera rooms and whatnot. They inspect me like a hawk and keep checking the dice, even swapping out the dice for others just to be sure I wasn't cheating. I made sure to remain composed and keep my hands on the table side in plain view at all times. I continued to make more shots without throwing a 7 until one person spills his drink on his shirt. That clued me in somehow that this run was soon over. so I asked to take down my bets, ensuring I would lose the least amount possible on the inevitable 7-out. It happens as I expected, and there is a big "Oh!" from the table, followed by cheering and rejoicing. An incredibly sexy and attractive woman from the other side of the table, who had obviously won a nice sum of money, ran over and embraced me, begging me to stay longer. It's probably almost 3:30 AM by now, so I told her I had to go. Other people came up and said, "Do you know how much money you just made me?" I was in no shape to tally up the damage, and my girlfriend was obviously not happy about this fine-ass girl making a pass at me. She promptly escorted me from the casino floor. We leave the casino and get on the highway to our hotel, which was quite a ways away. At this point she pulls over the car because she can't see. Her contacts were acting up and she didn't bring a pair of glasses. She tells me that I have to drive. At first I wasn't sure if she was joking, but the crying and her pain proved otherwise. I get behind the wheel and off we go. I was still tripping very hard, and the edges of cars and other features curled unnaturally and projected into an impossibly infinite vanishing point, and the lights were unbearable. I had this moment of realisation that the inverted universe perspective was still at full throttle. I was able to know what other drivers were going to do before they even did. I even made an effort to tell my girlfriend what they were going to do, and I was correct every time. There was a car in front of us at some point with a custom license plate that said, Karma. I thought to myself, Karma? Is this karma? Is this what I get for trying to be some sort of astral badass and control the universe to make money? But I digress. No one at that craps table even tossed me a single dollar for what they won under my hand. I hardly won anything, which is exactly why we're driving to literally nowhere for a shitty hotel room that wasn't $450. Later in the drive, a strange monotonous and plodding song came on whatever obscure radio station we had on. It was at least 3:45, if not 4 AM at this point, so some pretty weird stuff was bound to be on. This particular track seemed to just stretch into infinity, and it captured my mind like being trapped in a tunnel. I just wanted the drive to be over. Minutes felt like hours, and I even said to my girlfriend, I don't think I can do this anymore. Eventually though, we reached the hotel, more like a motel, and I immediately went for the bathtub to try and sober up so I could sleep. I must have spent at least 45 minutes in the tub, and it felt like the grey matter of my brain was being involuntarily massaged by the hand of God or something. It was a very strange sensation, and I didn't particularly want it to continue. I got out of the tub and had to somewhat reluctantly refuse sex from the girlfriend, as there was no way that was possible. Eventually, I managed to fall asleep somehow. I guess you could say there was a special breed of high roller at the casino that night. I'm still looking for answers to this day.